Okay, I think we'll get started. I'm sure some people will join as we go on, but so a big hello to everybody. I just want to let you know, first of all, that you are in the right place. If you have heard about this thing called a trauma bond and you want to know more about it, or you've already learned a bit about the trauma bond, but you're not sure how to break it, or maybe you've tried to take some steps to break it, but you're not sure whether it's working or what it's supposed to feel like. So if you fall into any of these, pop a little one in the comments if you do, and we will get on with understanding the trauma bond and how it's formed. We are going to be learning why we form this strange connection, which often feels like something that we would describe as love. So by the end of it, this webinar, you are going to have a way to put together your personal strategy, and that's going to speak to you on both a literal and a subconscious level. You're going to identify the actions that you can start taking today to break the bond, and you are going to find out how you can be free emotionally, physically, and energetically from an abusive or a toxic individual. So before we get started, a little bit about me. My name is Eve Bradley. I'm the founder of Your Easy Life, and it is my mission to work with those who have experienced domestic and narcissistic abuse and facilitate healing and cultivate confidence for you to be your authentic and your successful self. I started Your Easy Life just over a year ago, following my experience of 2 abusive relationships that spanned 8 years. I found myself falling out of the arms of an abusive alcoholic and into the arms of a narcissist. And I was stuck in this cycle, and I felt really consumed by the fog that is created in this environment. And I just, 1 second. Okay. Yeah, I kept on going backwards and forwards, and I was blaming myself, and I believed that he could change, and I was excusing a lot of his behavior because of his mental health, because of his drug addiction, because of the stress of running our own business and the loss of his father at a young age. And then I found out I was pregnant. And things really started to change, because at first he was the perfect partner and the doting dad, and then soon his mask slipped again, and this time it wasn't just me that he was intimidating and scaring and threatening and assaulting, it was my baby too. And something inside me flipped, and that fog kind of started to lift, and I just declared that enough was enough, and I ran. And I was still really stuck in the trauma bond at that time, and it was excruciating to try and get away, but I vowed to myself that I would heal. And in doing that, I started Your Easy Life as a result of my own healing journey. And I started it for 3 reasons. The first was that I wanted to give something back to the online community of survivors who had guided and supported me after I escaped from this cruel and abusive ex-partner. And I had this dream to create a course which incorporated everything that I'd learned through my own healing journey. And I did that. I created the Freedom, Recovery and Transformation Programme, which some of you will have been on. And this guides women through the healing process using my signature easy technique. And if anyone wants to know more about that, then I can send them details, or you can head over to the website for that. It's a totally free course, and it runs once a month. The second thing I wanted to do with Your Easy Life is I wanted to facilitate safe spaces where survivors can heal, with like other people that just get it, where you can cry and laugh and moan and boast, and you can do it all on your phone or via Zoom, and there's no judgment, there's no stigma, there's no forms to fill in. You know, there's nothing that you don't want to talk about. You're just in a safe space with people that get it. And I've been, really, really fortunate to connect with amazing people through those safe spaces. Now, the third thing that I wanted to do was to use my skill set to empower women. And some men now, more and more, are reaching out for help, which is really amazing. But when I first started, it was all about empowering women so that you're able to live the life of your dreams. Like, if you want to be financially free and run your own business or retrain in something and provide for your family without relying on any alimony or any maintenance, we want to make that happen. So I started to combine my knowledge and experience in business startups, in mentoring and training and problem solving to create programs which they bring about huge transformations and pick people up and put them on the path that they were always destined for. And not only do I get to do this to support survivors through my work with Your Easy Life, I've also transformed my own life and my own mindset, and I've grown and expanded in pretty much all areas of my life. As a result of this kind of healing work, I've now got strong boundaries. I'm financially independent and secure. I've grown in confidence just so much, and I didn't even recognize myself when I escaped that relationship. And it would be wrong for me to say that I'm back to my old self, because she has gone. But what I am now is my new self and my true self. And I love myself and I offer myself and others compassion. And I've got much more patience, and I've forgiven myself for the pain that my mind, body and soul has endured in my life. I'm a total recovering perfectionist and people pleaser. And I still have plenty of wobbles, but I also have full faith in my coping mechanisms. And I now know what I need. And most importantly, I give it to myself without shame and without guilt. And a vital part of my success in cultivating this life is this thing that I'm going to teach you about today. It's freeing myself of that bond that had me so addicted to that relationship. It was so restricting for me, and it really was preventing me from moving into the next stages of healing, which are still pretty messy, but they're where like the fun and the freedom and the real growth happens, and you can really start to sense that kind of release of the bind. Now, it is important to note that everyone's journey is unique, and there's no one size fits all when it comes to resolving trauma. But once I got my head around what this bond was and how I could break it, I took quantum leaps, and old ways of thinking, old behaviours and old beliefs all started to fall away. Breaking the trauma bond was the first step I needed to complete before I could start to do that inner work that I needed to do to heal, the kind of shadow work and the inner child work that would lead me towards accepting and understanding and loving my authentic self, so that I could grow and expand my energy and be the woman that I'd not only felt I'd been suppressing all my life, where I'd been giving myself over to this string of men who had just drained and used and abused me, but also the woman I wanted to be for my children, the role model that they deserve. Both of my girls have been gifted to me in the most miraculous of circumstances, and I won't go into that, but I just knew that we are destined for more, and that it was only me that could make it happen. And it all started with breaking the bond. So today we're going to start with what the trauma bond is. Then we're going to talk about why it forms. We're going to talk about whether you've got one, how it forms, and then we're going to really dig into what your personal bond is made up of, how you can utilize your innate processing style to break the bond, and then some things that you can actually do to start breaking the bond today. And then at the end, I'll introduce you to the next steps you can take on this journey and invite you to ask any questions and give you an idea of where to go from here. So before I do that, I do just want to remind you that this kind of work can be very heavy. So once we've finished or you've watched the replay, please try to relax as much as you possibly can. Allow this information to really integrate, and drink plenty of water as you really kind of process what we go through today. Now, everything that I share as part of my work as an abuse recovery mentor is checked and approved by a licensed medical professional. None of the techniques mentioned are intended to replace medical or therapeutic intervention, though. So if you're undergoing any treatments, the techniques that I share can definitely complement treatments, but they should be done under the supervision of a medical professional. So let's get started with what is a trauma bond. Well, a trauma bond is the connection that we form with a toxic individual in the absence of patient, kind, consistent, balanced, and compassionate love. It's what we interpret as love, but is actually a trauma response. And it's a way for our brain to rationalize why someone who says they love us would treat us in such a cruel way. And because we do this over and over again, our brain begins to latch onto it. So that when we're inside the relationship, it keeps us drawn to the person, or it keeps us going backwards and forwards. And then when we're out of the relationship, it keeps us thinking about them. It keeps us asking questions and trying to work out whether what we felt was real or not. Now, it's formed as a result of really consistent behaviours. And in times of trauma, we look to a caregiver to provide us with comfort and support. And often that abuser takes on the role of the caregiver, and we find ourselves in this situation where they are creating a need for them to provide the comfort. And this really reinforces that trauma bond, and it reinforces that feeling that no one or nothing else would be able to offer the same kind of love that we get from that person. Now, I prefer to think of it as not one single connection, but as many, many strands. So like a rope that is made up of much smaller strands that it gets its strength from with each of these small, weak fibres. But when you combine all those small, weak fibres, you get this really incredibly strong rope. Now, each one of these fibres or strands represents a connection that's formed throughout the relationship and might seem something really quite minuscule, minor, every day. But as that builds up, it begins to get this strength. And when the truth about how much power and control and abuse we've experienced really starts to settle into our conscious awareness, this rope is trying to pull us back under into this illusion of the relationship that we thought we had, or the one that we're envisioning for the future that we haven't been able to realise. Now, if you're here, there's a good chance that you've already identified that you've got a trauma bond, and it could be a very strong one, or you may have already done some work to cut those ties. If you're no longer in the stage of seeing a person as something they're not, but your mind still wanders to that what if place, then there's a chance that the trauma bond is still impacting your life. Now, here is a limited list of signs, because there are an awful lot that you might have a trauma bond and it might still be impacting on your life. And this list covers those who may have very recently left a toxic relationship, or those that might be 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, but still feel connected to this person or are still seeing impact. So there's, signs like being attracted to untrustworthy people indicate that we've still got some unresolved trauma to deal with. Or continuing to seek contact with people who you know will cause you further pain. That could be something that is indicative that you've maybe very recently broken away from somebody. So how does a trauma bond form? Well, each trauma bond is as unique as the experiences that have gone to create it. But by splitting it into 3 main strands, we can start to really get to know our own personal trauma bond and what has led to its formation. So we're going to have a little look at each of these strands now. So the first one is the emotional strand, and this is the one that is made up of those memories, those shared moments that show up in us as a tendency to reflect. So we start to experience this kind of pull of the trauma bond in this kind of desire to go back. It makes you feel like you would sacrifice your freedom to go back to those moments of affection, go back to those compliments. And it's often triggered by photos, by smells, anniversaries, it's seeing other happy couples or hearing about other people's relationships. It could be songs, it could even be the brand of toothpaste in the supermarket. But what it does is it activates our grief response. And so all the while we're kind of battling with some of the stages of grief that we all go through when we lose something or someone, and it tries to kind of pull us in to minimize that pain of the loss. But as we know, along with all the positive memories, we've got these negative memories, and these are the times when our survival mechanism's been activated. And it's those times that our mind associates with that need for care. And because that main caregiver is often the person that's putting us through these times, we end up with this kind of overlay of traumatic memories and good memories that get intertwined, and it begins to get a bit of a mess, quite honestly, and our mind can't sift through it. We've got this emotional and psychological trauma that's a result of this prolonged stressful event that really shatters your sense of security, and it makes you feel helpless. And having both of these realities existing simultaneously puts us into a state of what's called cognitive dissonance. Now, cognitive dissonance is an emotion, and it presents as this internal tension that we feel when a behaviour that we're seeing or some information that we're receiving doesn't match our beliefs about that thing or the person. So as we're getting to know a person, we're forming an idea in our mind of who they are. So when we then experience behaviours or hear information to the contrary, we experience this tension. Can anyone relate to that feeling? Let me know in the comments, or pop your hand up if you can relate to that feeling of that tension. And in times of extreme cognitive dissonance, it feels like you're on this kind of merry-go-round where your head is spinning with this sense of like unreality, and your heart is trying to stay still and work out why the person who claims to love you has abused you. And it's best understood through one of Aesop's fables called The Fox and the Sour Grapes. And this is a story about a fox who is wandering along a path, and he spots a really delicious looking bunch of grapes, and he tries to reach up to get them, and he can't get to them, they're too high up. So he jumps up again, and he just cannot reach the grapes. And after a while, he decides that the grapes must be sour. He can't reach them because the grapes are sour. And this is him trying to placate that tension. Because he can't have what he wants, he decides to say, well, I didn't want it anyway, they were sour. And we can actually relate this kind of seemingly harmless to a seemingly harmless situation. So let's say you're on a diet and someone asks you if you'd like a delicious slice of apple pie. So you really want to eat the apple pie, which is the behaviour, but it's not matching your current belief that you're on a diet. So you've got a few options to kind of relieve that tension. Now you could change your behaviour and you could not eat the apple pie. You could stick to what you said you're going to do, and you could not eat the apple pie. Or you could change your belief and you could eat one slice of apple pie every 2 weeks and say that my diet is for one slice of apple pie every 2 weeks. The next thing you could do is you could add in a compensating behaviour. So you could say, I promise to work out for an extra half an hour in the gym and I'll burn off that slice of apple pie. Or you could deny the conflicting information altogether and say, do you know what, apples are fruit and I'm not having cream, so it's not even that bad. And all of this does is it placates that tension internally that we're experiencing. And it's actually quite useful because it presents us, you've had apple pie for lunch, of course. How funny. So it presents us with this opportunity to challenge our beliefs and carry out actions that are aligned to our beliefs. And that discomfort gets us to kind of think about it. But when someone is manipulative and is creating this spinning world, we don't know what to think. So we are going to have a look at a scenario where cognitive dissonance is being experienced and it can become toxic and reinforce the trauma bond. So I'm going to tell you about Linda and Paul. Now, Linda and Paul have been seeing each other for a while and everything's been going great. They're head over heels in love and they've started to make really big plans for their future together. But then Linda finds inappropriate communication between Paul and another woman on his phone. Now, Linda believes that Paul is a good man, and now she suspects that he's cheating on her. She's naturally upset and confused that she's discovered these messages, and she's experiencing this tension because Paul's behaviour isn't matching her beliefs about him right now. And so in order to relieve the tension, there are a few plausible scenarios. There are lots of scenarios that could play out in this instance, but I'm going to go through a few plausible ones where Linda's trying to relieve that tension. So the first thing Linda could do is alter her belief about Paul. She could realise that he's not the man that she thought he was. And since she also believes that someone who loves her would not treat her this way, she leaves Paul and she leaves the relationship. The next thing Linda could do is maintain the belief that Paul is a good man. And when he apologises and promises that it's a one-time thing, she believes him, she believes that it was unimportant, and she adapts her belief to relieve that tension, that dissonance. The other thing that Linda might do is she might try to relieve it by blaming herself, telling herself that she's not been good enough and that it's her fault that Paul's had to seek intimacy elsewhere. She could change her beliefs about herself and may even tell herself that she must try harder in the future to try and relieve that tension or stop it from happening again. Another way she could relieve the tension is for Linda to believe Paul when he tells her that what she's seen simply isn't true, that she's misunderstood the messages because of her jealous nature. And here we can see how gaslighting starts to try and affect the tension that's experienced during times of dissonance. And then the final thing that I've got here today, like I said, there's loads of things that could happen between Linda and Paul right here, but Linda could deny to herself that she ever saw these messages, and she could just pretend it didn't happen. She could just kind of bury it inside because she doesn't want to upset the good thing they've got going, and she knows that it will cause upset. So she tries to placate that tension by denying it. Now, can you see how all of these scenarios do placate the tension? They do make it go away, other than the first one where she honours the truth. But the others are all this situation where you've got this sense of unease, and that's internalised, and that reinforces the trauma bond. So the next strand of the trauma bond that we're going to talk about is the physical one. And this is the chemical part of the bond. And this is something that we often have no idea is happening. We might have an awareness of those feelings where something doesn't quite match up with somebody, but this one can often be happening very much under the surface, because some of our bodily functions are conscious and some of them are really automatic. And there are a handful of things like blinking and breathing, which can be both. Now, the body signals to our brain to function through a series of signals which prompt the production of hormones in our endocrine system and neurotransmitters that are formed in the brain. So when we're experiencing different emotions, really what's happening is different doses of hormones and neurotransmitters are being interpreted by our brain, and then we're experiencing them in feeling, in our mood, our energy levels, our clarity over situations, our desire to do something. And we can predict what effect certain chemicals will have on us with some really good accuracy. So, for example, a good dose of serotonin will make us feel like we're in a good mood, like we've got a well-rounded perspective on a situation and that we're more confident in our ability. Whereas cortisol will make us feel confused. It will make us feel despairing and out of control, and as though we can't see the answer to the problem we're facing. One of the most important neurotransmitters for us to understand as survivors is dopamine. Dopamine plays a huge role in how we feel pleasure. It's released in anticipation of reward, and it's the feeling we get just as something good is about to happen. It plays a huge role in our ability to think and plan because it's heavily linked to prediction and then anticipation of a result. So it's what keeps us as humans addicted to substances and addicted to behaviours. So for gamblers, it's like the anticipation of the result and then the feeling they get as their chosen horse crosses the line or the team's just about to win before the whistle's blown. And for alcoholics, it's the moment that they pour that first glass of wine or the feeling they get as it's about to touch their lips. And for a shopping addict, it's the moment that they make the transaction and await the arrival of their next purchase. And if we look at the cycle of abuse, we can see what we as survivors become addicted to. So this cycle of abuse helps to illustrate common patterns of abusive behaviour in relationships. It also helps us to understand why we find it difficult to break free. During each phase, the body produces a cocktail of chemicals, and in the same way that the brain can become dependent on and seek out hits from a synthetic, a prescription, or a natural drug, we often become addicted to this hormonal cycle and form the trauma bond. Now, the first stage of the abuse cycle is when the tension builds. And this is when an abusive partner is displaying unease in response to an external stressor. So anything can fuel this tension. It could be family issues, it could be trouble at work, it could be physical illness, it could be fatigue. But their frustration and their dissatisfaction intensifies over time and prompts in them feelings of powerlessness, injustice, anger, paranoia. And sensing that simmering tension, you try to find ways to placate that abusive partner and prevent the abuse from happening. So you might feel anxious, you might feel on your guard and hyper alert to their needs. You might alternate between tiptoeing around them, trying not to set them off, and then making an extra effort to provide physical and emotional support. And it's during this phase that we experience increased levels of adrenaline. And this hormone typically helps your body to react more quickly. It makes the heart beat faster, it increases blood flow to the brain and muscles, and it stimulates the body to make sugar for fuel. Then next in the cycle comes the incident of abuse or violence, and I call this the outburst. And this is when the abuser releases this tension onto others by attempting to regain power by establishing control. So abusers might insult you, name call, threats of harm, break things around the house, attempt to control your behaviour. It might be sexual or physical violence. It could be emotional manipulation. So they might accuse you of making them mad, blame you for your relationship problems. Now, always remember that people choose to abuse others. Any tension that they experience might explain the abuse, but it never excuses it. And it's during this phase that the body releases cortisol. And this is known as the stress hormone for very good reason. The prolonged exposure to this hormone is proven to cause fatigue, bruising easily, hair loss, mood swings, mental fogginess, irregular periods, as well as anxiety and depression, and a whole host of other long-term and short-term symptoms. And after this incident comes the outburst. After the outburst comes the reconciliation phase. And this is when the tension gradually begins to fade. And in an attempt to move past the abuse, the abuser might apologise or they might gaslight, which is manipulating by psychological means you into doubting your own sanity. So for saying things like, that isn't what happened, or it might just be as obvious as saying, you're crazy and you're the one with the problem, not me. But it's this behaviour, interestingly, that triggers the release of dopamine, because this is the reward hormone and it's released in anticipation of something good or rewarding being experienced. And it's the anticipation of whether they're going to start being kind, love bombing, being the person they were at the start of the relationship, or whether they're going to turn and twist and show their true self, because it's also released on prediction. So if you're correct in your prediction of the behavior, you're going to get dopamine. And this is often why we don't feel like we can get off the roller coaster. But it is possible to have a healthy relationship with dopamine, and this is one of the keys to breaking the trauma bond. The final phase in the cycle is the calm period, and this is when the abuser might use kindness, gifts and loving gestures to kind of usher in a honeymoon phase, or they might just not be as cruel or as mean or as self-seeking as they are during the other phases. And it's this phase that promotes oxytocin and serotonin, and it's the feel-good hormones that we experience during this time. They're the ones that make us feel warm and fuzzy inside. And in order to maintain peace and harmony, both parties generally have to come up with some sort of explanation or justification for the abuse. And this is what relieves that cognitive dissonance that we're experiencing emotionally, and that's the hormonal kick we get from doing that. You might feel during this period that whatever had upset them and triggered the abuse had passed, that they will never do anything like this again. And it's this period that is the one that gets shorter and shorter and shorter. The more rounds of the cycle that are experienced, it can just be an hour of calm before you're next into that tension building, and it's just rinse and repeat around and round in that cycle. Now, abusive relationships, like all relationships, are complex, and it isn't always possible to just categorize everyone's experience into this 4-step process. Some abusers are covert, which means they are sneaky and subtle, and they can create this atmosphere of control and isolation that persists through all of the stages. So things like financial control, threats of sexual violence, humiliation, verbal degradation, demeaning pet names can be used all the way through, whether it's the calm phase or the outburst phase. And they all make up part of that campaign of control. But the cycle and the way that the hormones are released throughout the process really can help us to understand why, when we're free of an abusive partner, we experience feeling so unhappy. And even though we might not like them anymore, we still feel unable to end things, or we fixate on good days and we use those as proof that they truly care, or we're making excuses and defending their behaviour when other people express concern, or we continue to trust them and hope that they'll change. Now, it's these behaviours that are all indicators of an addiction to this process rather than love for the individual, because anyone who truly loved and respected us would never behave in this way. And finally, we've got the energetic element of the bond. And in order to understand this, we have to turn to quantum mechanics. Now, energy is all around us, and it's of us. And everything we see and we smell and we touch and we taste and we hear, it's all made up of energy and different frequencies. And it's even more so, it's those things that we just know, the things we can sense, we can feel it in our tummies, we can tell when someone's lying or if something bad's about to happen. That's energy too. And actually, you and I are made up of nothing more than energy particles. Right down at the very core to our makeup, we've got these particular matter kind of buzzing around. It might be water, flesh, blood, skin, whatever it is, those cells are energy, just like everything around us that we can see, and most of it we can't. And the important thing to remember about this energy is you can't destroy it. You can't delete or cancel energy, you can transform or transmute it. So our personal energy and the energy fields that we're made up of transmit to the rest of the energy in the universe, and it can attract or repel certain types of people, events, or outcomes depending on what energy frequency we're vibrating at. Now, energy cords that are made and connected between two people's energy bodies kind of stretch between us like an umbilical cord, and they transfer this emotional energy or this life force energy between the two people. And it doesn't matter how far away the other person is, because the cord isn't physical, the distance becomes irrelevant, and it's possible for this connection to be felt on the other side of the planet. These energetic connections and cords have been documented in like long distance healing studies, where it's shown that if you think about another person or even show a picture of a total stranger to somebody, it registers in their energy field somehow. And the chords that are created between two people or groups of people that have emotional relationships, like lovers, friends, workmates, ex-spouses, even enemies, we all have these energetic chords between us. And the most commonly felt entanglements are the energetic attachments of lovers, because each person shares their energy with the other during sex. So the emotional ties or feelings of love are shared, and they build these chords the quickest and the most effectively. And one of these chords, so often the chords are between our bellies, or it might be our heart or our solar plexus as well. You might find that the chord is sited there. And when somebody receives somebody sexually, that seed is planted in that person's sexual center, and the chord is formed where the energy can be drawn from one person to another. And when two people have been in a relationship for a time, there's always going to be a chord there. And it depends on the emotional issues of the two, of whether the chord becomes draining or if it stays clean and supports one another. And it really helps with emotional nurturing. So if one person is toxic, it's likely that they'll drain the other person. And this only leads to resentment, and often creates this reliance on the connection to justify its existence. And it has this strange effect whereby breaking contact and communication with somebody becomes really difficult, because they seem to just know how to match your energy. So even when you try to break contact, they know exactly what to say and when to say it. In fact, many people find that toxic partners or exes text them in this very strange synchronistic way, like you'll be thinking about them and then a message will come in. And this often makes us feel like we're never going to get away, or that we're destined to be connected to this person together as things start to kind of border into the supernatural. But as I mentioned just a moment ago, energy is about focus and intent, and it's totally possible to sever this energetic cord and repel people who are not good for your emotional and physical well-being. It's really important to remember that also it only takes one person to clear the cord, and it will be cleared for the other person. So we've got there a very brief summary of those three aspects that go to make up your trauma bond. And so now that we know those, and you can start to think about what makes up your unique trauma bond, because everyone's is slightly different, and we will want to get to know ours so that we can create a strategy to break it. And I mean to break it in a way that not only do you no longer hold feelings for the other person, you barely think about them. And when you do think about them, it's in a healthy and self-supporting way. Now, think about what I said and have a think about what might make up your bond. You don't have to share in the comments, but trust your instinct on which parts, when I was talking about it, really appealed to your kind of the way that you think more. Like if you drifted off when I was talking about one of the aspects, there's a good chance that isn't your dominant strand. And think about that, which ones make up your really dominant, your own personal trauma bond. And then the next thing I'm going to ask you to do is to establish what kind of processor you are, because there are three main types of processors. So there are visual learners, and they are people that understand and remember things by seeing. So if you're a visual learner, you're going to prefer to see what you're learning. So you're going to want to see things like graphs and charts and pictures. They're going to capture your attention when you're learning about things. And visual learners are really good at reading body language and often have a really keen eye for aesthetics. Whereas and they don't like spoken directions. So if you struggle with spoken directions, you want to like see a picture or think of landmarks, then that's a good chance that you're a visual learner. Or you might be an auditory learner and you retain information by hearing and listening. So you prefer to hear what you're learning, and your brain will store the information by the way it sounds. So lessons are learned by listening and repeating notes back out loud. Auditory learners often are very good musicians, and they benefit from like word association techniques when they're learning. They might be slower readers, but have really, really good memories. So if you're an auditory learner, you might hum to yourself or talk to yourself when you're bored or when you're on your own. And the third type of processor is a kinesthetic processor. And these are people that retain information by doing, not by reading or seeing or hearing. It's got to be hands-on physical activity. And they learn lessons from touching things, building, drawing, not sitting and listening and kind of listening in lectures and what have you. They are usually strong in maths and science and would rather show someone how to do something rather than verbally explain it. So I have got a little 5-question quiz which will help you to establish what your dominant processing type, or maybe might reveal that you've got a slightly mixed type. So the first question on here is, when choosing a book to read for fun, what type would you pick? Would you pick A, with lots of pictures, B, with lots of words, or C, word searches and puzzles? And if you've got a pen and paper, just jot down your letter and we'll top them up and we'll work out which one you are. So number 2 is, in school, how did you usually study for a test? Did you read books or your notes and review the pictures or charts? Or did you ask somebody to ask the questions so that you could answer them out loud? Or did you make up index cards to review? And the third question is, what do you find most distracting when you're trying to study or read? And that is it, A, people walking past you, B, loud noises, or C, an uncomfortable chair. And then question 4 is, when you go to a party or an event, what do you usually remember the next day? Is it A, the faces of the people who were there, B, the music that was played, or C, the dance moves that you did and the food that you ate? And then finally, when someone's giving you directions to your house, when you're giving someone directions to your house, what are you most likely to tell them? Are you likely to tell them about landmarks and buildings that they'll pass? Or is it going to be B, the names of the roads or the streets they're going to be on? Or is it C, you're going to say, just follow me, it'll be easier and I'll show you how to get there? So once you've done that, tot up how many you got. And if you got mostly A's, then you're a visual learner. If you're B's, you're an auditory processor. And then C's, you've got this kinesthetic processing system. And having this information is really important because it means that when we're looking at the next stage of the process, you're going to have the best chance of speaking to your subconscious in a way that it really understands. Because 95% of our internal processing goes on in our subconscious, and it's going to really improve the effectiveness of what you need to do next to break your trauma bond if you're speaking the language of your subconscious. So we're going to talk now about how to break the trauma bond. And I've developed this 3-dimensional approach because we've seen that the bond is very complex and it's made up of memories, emotions, chemicals, energetic forces. So in order to break the bond, we've got this strategy which seeks to break down the forces and cut the strands whilst cultivating more inner strength, a greater connection to your true identity, and an improved belief that you can do this. So once we know what kind of processor you are, then we can start to select which activities you need to start undertaking that will communicate to yourself and your subconscious that you're ready to break the ties. So I will introduce you to the 3 dimensions that you need to integrate into your life. So the first is the act dimension, and this incorporates all of the things that you can start doing to break the bond. So if you've established that your dominant processing system is visual, then using guided meditations in which you're taken on an imaginary journey to release these ties is really going to support you, as is printing affirmations off and sticking them up for you to see somewhere. But if you're an auditory processor, you're going to want to say the affirmations out loud to make them more effective, rather than just looking at them. Or you might listen to sound frequencies that are at a healing frequency level, which is a really powerful way for you to intentionally disconnect from anyone toxic in your life. Now, if you're a kinesthetic processor, you're going to want to carry out a cord cutting ceremony and literally get something and cut it with some scissors, or maybe snap strands of spaghetti, or think about breaking the bond when you're chopping food or slicing vegetables for your evening meal. Now, other actions which are good for all processing types involve cleansing the energy of the home, incorporating dopamine-rich foods into your diet to provide the body with the hormones that it craves in a healthy and safe way, as is incorporating a really cleansing yoga flow into your daily routine. Ultimately, the best way to act is intentionally and regularly. And I'm going to be sending out to everybody who signed up to the webinar a PDF packed full of actions that you can take to break the trauma bond. So on this resource, you're going to find a list of the actions you can do, but also which processing type these work best for. So you can start to put together your strategy by selecting actions that both appeal to you and are going to work for you. Now, always remember, it took regular and consistent action to form the bond, and it's going to take regular and consistent action to break it. So rather than waiting all week and then doing all of these things on a Sunday afternoon, try to incorporate them into your everyday routine as much as you can, and it's a much more effective way to break the bond. The next dimension you're going to be working on simultaneously is the release dimension, because when we're working to break the bond, inevitably all those emotions, memories, and energy, it's going to surface. And it's this happening that often induces that fear and causes us to stop the work because it feels uncomfortable. But the problem is the pain never gets resolved. So when we incorporate ways to release this in a healthy and permanent way, we find that our emotions are released much more intentionally, and we've got this much healthier and more kind of manageable way to break the bond. So there are 3 ways that I've identified you can really effectively release this kind of energetic fallout that happens when we're trying to break the bond. And the first way is through communication. So this could be in the form of writing or through talking, and it's like writing letters that you might want to kind of file away or destroy. It might be writing poems or song lyrics. I've got a lady that's written an amazing play about her experiences, and short stories, even a full memoir. Or you could journal. You could journal on your experience and use journal prompts, which is another really powerful way to release what's kind of happening for you as you're trying to take action to break the bond. Connecting with other survivors is the next way to release. Speaking to somebody who just gets it and having a good cry and, you know, sharing often in a laugh as well as a cry is such a powerful way to release what's going on. It's hard to even express how beneficial this is. Connecting with others and giving and receiving compassion is such a natural way to release, and so much of the bond can be released that way. And we also get this kind of accountability for our actions when we could be tempted to kind of do things that might not be in our interest in regards to our trauma bond. We've got this safe kind of community that we know are going to support us if we need them. The third method of release is creativity. So things like art and crafts and baking, gardening and decorating and building, sewing, knitting, anything that is creative. Now, some of these actually in themselves can be really good ways to act on breaking the bond. And you might find some of these are on the sheet that I'm going to send to you. But it's when you're doing them as a whole activity, it's about channeling that energy. So you find one that you enjoy, and then you intentionally set about your hobby to release any tension that might be built up at that time. And you don't always have to identify what the tension is. Just sitting down and saying, I'm just going to do this and it's going to release, is often enough for our subconscious to understand what we mean. Now, the final dimension, which once again is to be kind of incorporated alongside the others. It's not a case of stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, unfortunately. It's a bit of a mix of all of these, is the divert dimension. And the aim of this dimension is to retrain your subconscious to focus on your best interests, not anyone else's. So it's not in a selfish way that It's more of a like if my cup is full, then I can share from my overflow kind of way. So in order to do this, we need to spend some time establishing our individual values, identifying something that we might want to achieve and that's got a measurable result or outcome. So it might be retraining in something, it might be learning a new topic, it might be redecorating, it might be starting a business, increasing profit in an existing business, might be writing a book, working with a charity, offering support for other survivors or people that have got shared experience to you. It's about being something that kind of the thought of it lights you up inside. And it doesn't need to be something that takes over your life or becomes a replacement obsession, because that obviously would have its own kind of ramifications. But this is something you can do consistently and is moving forward towards your authentic desires. It's not about something that's going to put you under pressure or you're going to try and get quick results from. It's taking conscious action towards a goal that's in your interest. And when it comes to realizing dreams, it is always about small, consistent steps, not erratic leaps. So one of the first things to do is to get really clear on what your outcome or your desire is. And then if you have maybe identified a purpose and you want to move towards it, or you've got a specific project in mind, you can start to take small steps towards that. And actually, in my experience, it's this dimension that really locks in the progress that you make with the other two, because it's this one that stops you from falling back. And it's this one that facilitates the reclaiming of your identity and, in doing so, your true happiness. So now I hope that you've got an idea of what the trauma bond is, how it formed, and how you can break it. I'm just going to talk to you now about what you should do next. So the first thing is something that we've already started to do with our little quiz, but you might need to dig a little bit deeper to really understand understand what kind of processor you are. This step can't be overlooked, and many of us process differently at different times. So we might be a kinesthetic processor when it comes to dealing with emotions, but a visual processor when it comes to dealing with facts. So really getting to know what kind of processor we are is the thing that I attribute much of my success for me and my mentees in breaking their bonds, is really getting to know the processing type, so we're talking the right language to ourselves. The second thing to do is to start utilising the list of actions, which will be arriving in your inbox after today. And that's identifying those that really suit you, those that fit in with your processor, your processing type. And then the third thing to do is to plan out when you're going to do them and really commit to taking that intentional action. You can pick out things that you already do and transform them into bond breaking activities. You may well find that you're already doing things and you can intentionally start utilising these as bond breakers. Or you like things like chopping and cleaning and gardening and just your hygiene routine. It can be a really great regular practice that you think, I'm breaking the bond here. Now, the next thing you're going to want to do is to connect with other survivors so that you can release by giving and receiving compassion, because breaking this bond is a huge deal. And there are times when it gets very tough, and being close to other survivors can be really comforting. And it's just great to share your struggles and your wins with people that just get it. So play is a really valuable activity in seeking out support from other survivors. And then the final thing you need to do is to identify that personal project, goal, or accomplishment that is going to divert your attention and communicate to your subconscious that your future doesn't contain this toxic person. So with all that in mind, I'd just like to tell you now about a brand new group mentoring program that I'm launching in October. And it's a 12-week program that's going to join together like-minded survivors who are facing similar struggles. You'll come together with me and a handful of guest healers and specialists so that you can start 2022 free of your bond and free to be you. So the time that we spend together is going to be packed full of interactive workshops that are going to deepen your understanding and help you to heal. There'll also be self-paced exercises that will reveal your core values and a blueprint for your future that's aligned to your authentic self. We'll be taking actions together. We'll be welcoming a nutritionist, energy healers for both you and your home, a hypnotherapist, a yogi, and a creative writer, all of whom are survivors of domestic and narcissistic abuse themselves, and are going to join us to empower you with new skills, and along with myself, to support you as you grow your confidence so that you can put your needs ahead of those who drain you and get free of that trauma bond. The most exciting thing for me about this program is that you get to share in each other's journeys. You get to support and share stories and vent and celebrate the wins. And we're all going to be there for one another through the inevitable ups and downs that come with taking this kind of incredible action to heal and grow. I can't lie and say that it's I can't lie and say that this work is successful overnight, because that wouldn't be fair. But when you've got a group of cheerleaders behind you every step, it all becomes much easier. And it's a program that really has got the power to change everything for you right now. And it's priced at £575 sterling, or you can pay in 4 monthly instalments of £149 per month. If you're interested in this, I'll be sending out a link to my website and my calendar so that you can have a look at more info, or you can book a little Zoom call with me and I can answer any questions and we can get to know each other ahead of the programme starting. And if you're unsure about the group programme but would still like to work with me some more before making a decision, then I'm going to be doing an interactive workshop at the end of the month. This is going to be hosted on Zoom here. It'll be around a 3-hour workshop where we'll be establishing your personal processing mix using my unique metric. We'll also be utilising my printable planner so that you can plot out your strategy to break the bond. And then we'll be taking action together to practice the chemical release method. We're going to be using visualization techniques and subconscious reprogramming. We'll be doing behavioural activation therapy and 3-dimensional cord cutting. And you'll go away from the workshop with affirmation cards, a dopamine-rich cookbook, colouring and craft guides, and access to some exclusive meditations and visualizations that are purposely designed to cut the ties. And you'll have the confidence that you can do this. It's not going to be only a great taster for the group programme, it'll also have a tremendously healing effect on everyone who attends, and it will set you up with many of the tools that you need to break the trauma bond. And for anybody who does sign up to the group programme, either before or after the workshop, I will just waive the cost of the workshop. So if you sign up for Break the Bond before, you'll automatically get a ticket to the workshop live, or if you buy your ticket for the workshop and then sign up to Break the Bond, you'll get the £59 back, and that'll just be deducted from your full payment or your monthly instalments. The workshops are held on the 4th Tuesday of every month, and you'll receive full details after the webinar via email. And that brings me to the end of everything I've got to share today. So I'd like to invite you to ask any questions about the trauma bond and how to break it. And if you're watching on the replay, as I mentioned at the beginning, just scroll down to the bottom of the page and you'll find a question form, and I will reply to those via email or on a voice note. Has anybody got any questions that they'd like to ask from today's presentation? There's no pressure. I'm not one for asking questions either. I'm one for sending a little email after. So if anybody wants to drop me an email after, then I'm totally with you. Okay.
But just to say thank you. But just to say, I haven't got a question, but just thank you for that. It's really helped explain a lot. So.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I'm really glad you found it helpful, Nikki. And it's nice to meet you.
Yes, you too. Thank you for everything. You're
welcome.
My life at the perfect time. So.
Oh, you're welcome.
Sorry,
Nikki, go on.
I've just got to shoot. I've got to go. I've got another meeting at 3, so I better go just now. So sorry.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. No worries. Nice to see you.
Soon. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, so just thank you for coming, thank you for showing yourself this commitment to your own healing, and it would be really amazing if you could drop me a message or an email with your feedback from today's session so that I can continue to help other survivors to break this awful trauma bond, and as a community we can continue to raise awareness and to heal and to grow. And as I mentioned at the start, please be gentle with yourself today. The information needs to really integrate, and so yeah, keep yourself hydrated. I don't know about where you are, but it's really warm and lovely here, so yeah, lots of water today. And if you would like to join me and to continue your journey and break this trauma bond, then you can head over to the website, or you'll be receiving in your inbox an email with some more details about the things that I've mentioned. I hope you all have a really restful and enjoyable day, and you're absolutely welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for watching the replay if you are, and I'm sending you lots of love and yeah, all of the positive vibes for your healing. Lots of love, ladies. Thank you. Bye-bye.